Okay, ladies and gentlemen, today is March 23rd, 2019, and we're here with Council Member Tom Beamish with the La Habra City Council. Hi, Tom. How are you today?
Great, James. Thanks. Thanks for having me.
Tom, tell me a little bit, where were you born?
I was born in Altadena, California, which is right next and part of Pasadena. Way long time ago.
Yeah. And tell me, your parents are?
Jess and Shirley Beamish. My dad passed away, and my mother is 95, soon to be 96 years old. And we expect to have her around a few more years because my grandma lived to almost 102.
Oh, wow. Good genes, huh?
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about the Tom Beamish childhood.
Well, we moved around a lot. My dad was in the Navy, so I've been in every state in the Union before I was like 3 years old. Of course, I don't remember it.
Yeah.
Grew up, was in Santa Rosa for a while, Belmont Shore, but in 1957 we moved to La Mirada, where I grew up and went to school, La Mirada High. And back in those days, it was in 57, as I said, it was all olive groves. And Little La Habra was when I would come down Imperial Highway going to my grandmother's in Pomona. I felt like I was out in the country once I got out of La Mirada. So it was a great childhood. It was a wonderful time to grow up as a kid. I would be out of the house at sunrise and back in the house at sunset and be all over La Mirada, and it was a lot of fun.
So, siblings, who do you got?
I have my brother Craig, who now lives north of Sacramento, and my sister Terry lives in San Clemente, about a mile or so away from my mom.
So what hobbies did you have growing up as a kid?
Little League baseball, of course. That's what I did, and volleyball. Even back then, I enjoyed playing volleyball, and I've always been a runner. And I ran in high school and cross country, and enjoyed that a lot, and still run today.
What would you say your fondest memory is growing up as a child?
Going to the beach. You know, my family would go to the beach, and we would started at the beach, and then my dad bought a boat, and so when I was 9 years old I learned to water ski, and we were out every weekend at lakes, Lake Elsinore. My dad had a place out there, and I remember that because it was a mud swamp back in that day, and we'd be out in the middle of the lake, and I was short for my age at 9, but I could stand up and in the middle of Lake Elsinore. But so we did a lot of boating with my family.
Yeah. What are your fondest memories of your parents?
Oh, just being together. You know, it was a second marriage for my mom and dad. They were married when I was 6. My mom had divorced when I was 3. But I actually met my stepdad before my mom did, and I took a liking to him.
How was that?
Well, we lived in Belmont Shore, and he was the tenant upstairs, and my mom was downstairs. And he was out washing his car, and so I came to see if I could help him wash the car. And he was a good old Irishman, happy-go-lucky guy, and loved to golf and loved to socialize. And so I kind of introduced each other, and it went up to them.
You were kind of the matchmaker.
I kind of was, yeah. I guess I was looking for a dad.
Yeah. So tell me about the high school years of Tom Beamish. Where'd you go to high school? How were those years?
Went to La Mirada High. This will sound ancient, but it was 64 to 68. And as I said, real involved in high school the first couple of years. Did a lot of the club organizations involved with that, and of course, as I said, track and cross country and running. And then I went to work at 15. My very first job was cleaning bathrooms in a gas station, actually. And from there I worked in a restaurant, and so worked more and more, and so the high school activities started declining because I was more interested in working.
What was your fondest memory of high school?
My senior year, just kicking back. We had a group of 10, 12 friends that were close. In fact, I just met up with them up in Cambria last summer. Hadn't seen them in a long time, and we got together again. So just the friendships that we made in high school, and all the activities we did, and socializing was great.
So what were some of those activities?
Well, we partied.
Yeah. Okay.
We went to, you know, the football games, pretty much what's done today. We back in that day, La Mirada did not have their own football stadium.
Yeah.
So we would have to drive out to Cerritos College and watch the football games, and that was a lot of fun. So we would do that, and we were all working, and we had our cars, and my very first car was a '57 Chevy.
Wow.
My second car I had was a '64 GTO, which was the first year that they made that car, muscle car. And back in that time period, '67 to '72, if those of you who might remember, Whittier Boulevard was the place to cruise, and all my buddies and I would go up there, and we'd get in the traffic jam and cruise from about Harbor down to Painter, and we'd just be going back and forth, and you'd cruise around it. Back then, Westridge Shopping Center was an enclosed shopping center, and we'd drive around there. Whitwood, yeah, Whitwood. Westridge is the golf course.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, Whitwood.
Too many partying back then.
Yeah, I guess so. But it was pretty carefree. You know, it was really a different time.
So what was the music in the era back then? What were the fads? What was the music?
Oh, well, of course, in the '60s we had the Stones and the Beatles first out there. It started in '62, I think, and really became well known in the early '60s. So you had the Woodstock in '69-ish, I think. So it was the time of hippies and those bands, Bob Dylan and Beatles and Stones and Steppenwolf, Canned Heat for some of the fringe bands. But it was a lot of fun, and as people know today, a lot of that rock and roll, Beatle, Stone music is still played today. My children love the Beatles and the Stones, so it was a different time.
Did you have a favorite subject back in high school?
I originally was going to be a history teacher.
Oh, really?
I really enjoyed that. In fact, I went to Cerritos College and for a couple of years, and then went down to Cal State Long Beach to be a history teacher. And through different circumstances, I decided I'd rather be in business, and so then I went to work for the Southern Cal Edison Company in '72.
Okay. Did you go to college?
I did.
Where did you go?
Where didn't I go?
Oh, okay.
I went to
Interesting.
I went to Cerritos for a couple of years, and then Cal State Long Beach, and then I got married, and I was in Huntington Beach when I met my wife, but I always had the goal to get a degree, so I thought that would be the best thing to do for my career at Edison. So I went to Golden West for a few classes, and then we moved to La Habra, actually, for a year. We lived in an apartment over at Idaho in Lambert, and then our first house we bought in West Covina, and every time I'd move, I would change colleges. I went to Cal State Fullerton for, a couple of semesters, I suppose, but ultimately I wound up receiving a bachelor's degree in business from the University of Laverne.
How important was education to you?
It was real important because I was raised in a family with 3 children, and I just had that goal. So it's like Rose Espinosa has been going part-time for a long time, and I did the same track, taking 2-3 classes at most for years, as I just wanted to achieve that goal.
So let's go back a little bit here. How did you meet Nancy, your wife, who would end up becoming your wife?
Right.
Okay.
Well, I had moved to Huntington Beach, and I had mentioned volleyball earlier. We set up a volleyball court at the end of 16th Street in Huntington Beach back in the early '70s, and it's still there. And I played a lot of volleyball, and one day a friend of mine brought this girl down to the beach, and it happened to be Nancy.
Okay.
And we met, and soon we were dating.
Okay.
And that's how I met her.
So tell me about the Nancy and Tom dates. Where would you guys hang out? What would you do?
We'd hung out at the beach. It was a pretty simple life.
Yeah.
We were beach people. She was a swimmer in high school and water polo player, and she knew some of the lifeguards down at the beach, and so she'd been living in Seal Beach or Sunset Beach, and then moved in with her girlfriends to Huntington Beach. So we spent a lot of time at the beach. You know, on the weekends we'd go out to dinner and those kinds of things.
So what was Nancy's name back then?
Nancy.
No, I mean,
her name is Schramm, S-C-H-R-A-M-M. Her dad was Austrian.
So what caught your eye about Nancy early on?
Her smile.
Yeah?
She would smile, and being a platinum blonde girl at the time, her whole face would light up.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, and she was fun, very smart.
How long did you guys date?
Well, let's see. We met in, I think, December of '73, and we were married in August of '74. So we only dated for about 6-7 months.
Wow.
And 45 years later, we're still married.
Where did you propose to her at?
At the beach.
At the beach, really?
Yeah.
What beach?
Huntington Beach.
Okay.
That was our hangout.
So early on in your marriage, where did you guys move to?
Well, we were in Huntington Beach for the first 6 or 7 months, and then we decided to move inland. We had grown tired of the beach scene, I suppose, and we moved to La Habra.
Okay.
As I mentioned, we were at Idaho and Lambert in, I forget the name of the complex, right there on the corner.
Yeah, Woodlake?
Woodlake.
Yeah.
Is it Woodlake? I think it is. And we lived there for about a year, and we had moved because Nancy was pregnant with our first child.
Okay.
We'd been married a couple of years, I guess.
Okay.
And so once she became pregnant in La Habra, I guess, that's probably where it was, and so we started looking for a house and she was about 6 months pregnant, and I was looking all over.
Yeah.
And back in '77 is when housing prices started going up and interest rates were a little bit, but we bought a house in West Covina on
Okay.
Susanna Street, and we
Okay.
lived there for about 4.5 years.
So you went from La Habra to West Covina?
West Covina.
Okay.
And after 4.5 years, because prices really went up, we made some pretty good amount of money, and we started looking again, because by that time we had 2 girls, Katie and Kate. I'm getting my grandkids mixed up.
Amanda.
Amanda, yeah, right. Amanda and Katie. I kind of laugh about it because my daughter Katie I have 2 grandchildren. She has her 2 daughters are Kylie and Cassidy. So I've got Katie, Kylie, Cassidy, and their dog is Kayla.
And a crazy,
So I'm always
and a
getting
crazy
them mixed
dad.
Yeah, they just moved back to Pennsylvania, so that's why I was thinking of them. So Amanda was 4, getting ready to turn 5. Katie was 3. They're about 15 months apart, so we wanted to get a better school system and started looking around. And we knew a realtor in La Habra, and so we started looking at homes in Brea, La Habra, and we found this home we're still in La Habra.
Okay. And that's the home you live in still today?
Correct.
So, okay. So let's talk a little bit about. Let's go first with Amanda. Amanda, when was Amanda born?
I should have brought my wife.
Okay.
She would have been born in '77.
So how was that first experience to have your firstborn for you?
Oh, it was really exciting. Of course, back then, dads weren't necessarily able to go in and see the birth, but it was just starting to that transition. So I was able to see my daughter born, which was great. And as a new father, I was worried. My daughters, they enjoyed that a lot. In fact, one of my better memories is they had a old band that they made out of instruments, a pot kettle and a bass with a pot and different things. And I got up there and I was playing the bass kettle, I guess is what it was called.
Yeah.
But and the girls were doing some things, and it was a lot of fun. So we went to the Children's Museum a lot, and I'm happy to see it growing, thriving, and all these years later, it's of course a lot bigger, and they've done well over there.
Yeah.
And then what was really nice is taking my granddaughters for the first time to the museum, and they loved it. They love running around that museum. So we started with that, and then as the kids got older, we had them involved in the Depot Theater. And for several years, and that was a lot of fun. I was the lighting guy behind the scenes, and my wife helped with costumes and that, and so we were real involved with that. And as things progressed, my daughters did well. We had a son, a year after we moved here, And so Amanda became a cheerleader, so we were involved
So
with high school.
your son, his name is?
John.
John, okay.
He lives down in Laguna Hills, and he's done very well. And so we really did a lot with our kids. John started playing soccer, and that's how Nancy and I got involved with AYSO soccer. We were in Brea for 3 years at the beginning, and then we started in Region 94 here in La Habra.
Yeah.
And we got so involved, we were on the soccer board for several years, and spent a lot of time at Imperial Middle School playing soccer, and I was a referee and coach and did all that kind of stuff. So everything was involved around the family. Very traditional.
Youth sports and Depot Theater. And what were some of the productions do you remember that you guys got involved in back at the Depot Theater, and what your daughters did back then?
What's the play with the rabbit going down the hole? What is that? Somebody should
Alice
know.
in Wonderland?
Alice in Wonderland. Yeah, that was the one I remember because Katie, she played one of the characters, and we could tell she was a great actor even at 5 years old. She became the part, and so I remember that play, and there was several others, and it was just the camaraderie of the troupe was a lot of fun.
So what was the appeal to come to La Habra back in the early days for you? What do you think?
We were looking for a nice community to live in, and at the time it was nice, and we checked out the schools, and they were what we wanted, and we had contact because we had lived there 4 years earlier in the apartment, and so some of Nancy's family, her sister lived in Whittier, and then my parents were still in La Mirada, and so it was a lot of my high school buddies were still around town.
Yeah.
So it was just a comfortable place to move to.
What is your fondest memory of those early years for you?
Being involved with my kids.
Yeah.
Whether one time with Amanda, we drove up to one of the CIF playoff games with the football team, and being involved in the plays. We got involved in the school district. Nancy was in PTA and doing a lot of that, and then she eventually went to work for the district as an instructional aide, became a special ed aide, and was involved for 20 years with the district. So we knew the personnel of the school district. So we were very, very involved with all the types of things going on in town.
So back then, who were some of the families that you would interact with, and that were some of those from youth sports back then? Who were some of the players back in that day?
Oh, well, on the soccer board, of course, Jose and Lily Martinez were involved with the soccer back in the day, and that was a lot of fun. John Kramer, Carlos Lopez were a couple of referees that we'd kind of kid each other about who knew more about soccer, and did a lot of that. Of course, just all the people associated with what our kids were doing.
So, Tom, at what point did you kind of decide to get more involved in the city? I know you got involved in the community services, but how did that evolve for you to first get on a community services commission?
Well, it's kind of a funny story for me, though. Long and winding road, kind of speak. So as I'd mentioned, we were real involved in the Depot Theater and cheerleading in the schools. We were on advisory committees, and being in soccer back then, we had about 1,200 kids playing soccer, over 100 teams. So it was really busy, and I knew Steve Anderson at the time, and he was had always been involved in Little League. And I always was thinking, Little League gets more attention than soccer, and here we have a lot more kids, a lot more teams. So when the request went out for applicants for community services, my wife was going to apply.
Okay.
And we got talking about it, and for some reason we decided that I would apply, because I was assistant commissioner, I think, in soccer back then. And I thought that would be a good place to start with regards to getting more visibility for AYSO soccer. I wanted to get soccer more involved with the community. We had a banner contest, and that's the first time I met all the council members, because they came out to Imperial and
To
we had the
judge
banner
to judge the banner?
contest, and yeah.
Yeah.
So that was in '97, and because I always thought, oh, you know, AYSO needs more attention and
Yeah.
see how important it is to the community. So I was lucky and was put on the Community Services Commission for 3 years. I had no intent to ever run for city council.
Yeah.
It had never even crossed my mind.
So those 3 years that you were on the Community Services Commission,
Mm-hmm.
who were some of those that served you? Do you remember who was on the commission back then?
Oh, not really. It was a long time ago.
Probably Robinson was on there, right?
I don't really remember. No.
You don't remember, okay.
But I know back then my son was a skateboarder, and
Dave Coffin was on there when you were on there.
I think he was.
Yeah.
And Ted Heber, maybe.
Yeah.
I think they were on there for a
So
short
back
time
then,
period.
I mean, you got on a Community Services Commission. What do you remember most about serving on that commission? Greg Kine was there at the time.
Greg Kine was the
Yeah.
director of community services. What I remember the most is actually, again, family related. My son John was a skateboarder, really good, and we had no skate park in La Habra. And so John would really push for that, and I said, okay, let's start doing research. So I actually had talked to Steve Anderson, and he thought that would be a good idea. So my son and I and my wife, and the girls, we went down to Huntington Beach. They had a skate park at the time. Took pictures. We then went up to Ventura. They were building a skate park, so I was taking pictures of that, and different places my son and I would go. So it was kind of involved with my son and saying, look, this is how local government works, is we can put this together and present it at the commission, and
Yeah.
hopefully we can get the council interested in it. And today the skate park that La Habra built is still here.
Yeah.
And what was nice about that is my son saw civic action taking place.
Yeah.
So it was a good experience for him, and it was something we could do, because I don't get the skateboarding stuff.
Yeah.
But he really enjoyed it at the time, and I think it's kept a lot of the skateboarders now into the skate park, because back when John was skateboarding, they were skating on the roof of La Habra High and on church properties, and you'd see them doing their slides on the curbs and stair rails.
So early on, you kind of developed that friendship with Steve Anderson and
Well,
kind
his
of a-
kids were about my kids' age, and they went to school together at Sonora, and so we were aware of each other, but not real close. And then, but being on the Community Services Commission, I became more acquainted with Steve and Josie and his family, and we hit it off because our kids were doing similar things. And then when my term came up, I enjoyed the Community Services Commission a lot, and I thought, well, that's really pretty nice. And I've always had an interest in business and zoning and how we manage the city. So I thought, well, I'll offer to be either the Planning Commissioner or Community Services Commission. And so I interviewed for that for either position, and they chose me to be appointed to the Planning Commission, and I was on Planning Commission for 5 years.
Yeah.
And during that time, it started on Community Services Commission, the biggest thing was the development of La Bonita Park.
Yeah.
And the start of that was that skate park, and then it involved into the softball fields we have today. And then once I was on the Planning Commission, the biggest issue at the time was the Costco, because that was pretty much an abandoned shopping center at the time. And I was chairman on the Planning Commission twice when we had the Costco hearings that went till 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock in the morning. Not as long as what the council did.
Yeah.
But being involved on the Planning Commission was really a great background for running for council. And even on Planning Commission, I didn't contemplate or really think about running for council, but a year, I think in 2002 when you ran, I pulled papers and I just did that just to see what you had to do, because Steve Anderson was asking me to run for office.
Yeah.
And I was going, no, Steve, I don't really have any interest in that. So I said, okay, I'll pull the book and see. And I pulled this election book, and I said, who would ever do all this?
Yeah.
And so, and then I knew Jim was running, and so we chatted at a lunch one time, and decided, yeah, it'd be good for Jim to run, because I wasn't really into it at that time. And so 2 years later, Steve had been working on me for a couple of years, and I finally said, okay, I'll run, but I need your support. And he was real supportive of my running for council, and that's how I wound up getting on council. And it all started from being on the soccer board.
You know, one interesting thing that I noticed when you were in community services and planning commission is how active your wife is. It's kind
Very
of like
active.
a team effort. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, we're real family oriented. As I said, we were both involved in the advisory committees at Washington Middle School. She was real involved in PTA, and as the kids grew up, we were intricately involved in all they did and helped them and supported them. And Nancy, as I mentioned, went to work for the Habra School District, and she worked there for 20 years. And she's a very talented lady. In late 90s, I think, we joined the Lions Club, and so we were involved with the Lions Club. And she supported me on the Community Services Commission and planning, and then on council. And so she's a good sounding board. And so we love La Habra, and it's just been a great deal of satisfaction and honor to serve the people of La Habra.
So what's the secret to keeping your marriage together and being as successful and close as you are? Because it can be very stressful on the council, but having her just so supportive throughout those years.
Well, I think it's just love. I mean, we respect each other. We tend to not go to bed mad at each other, and we try to be supportive of each other and respectful. And I listen to her opinion. She's a smart lady, and she gives really good advice when we talk about issues. And in the beginning, she used to go to a lot of the meetings and keep track of what was going on. So she's a counselor. And I don't really have any magical idea of how to have a great marriage other than be respectful to each other and have each other's back.
Yeah. So 2004, you ran for city council.
I did.
So tell me a little bit about that election.
Well, that was interesting because I'm on the cycle of the presidential races.
Okay.
And so Steve Anderson was running, of course, and myself, and and Rose. Rose, that's her cycle also. And then, so we had 3 seats open, and only 4 candidates ran. And so it was really an eye-opener because I had not really done that before, and Steve was really instrumental in helping me how to raise money, how to walk precincts, which I did, you know. How to get your literature out. So it was very interesting because when I decided to run in December, and then in February is when I started, and being in the Lions Club, and as involved as we were in community, we called out, and I had a committee of like 30 people, and it was not real. Most of it was just for name recognition of people on my committee. And I had a core group, Dave Coffin and Rose Coffin. Rose Coffin was my campaign manager, and they did a lot. And it was a really good experience. And after that, I always had smaller committees and less each time I ran. It's not, campaigning is fun in some way, but I never liked being out there asking people for money.
So election night goes, you're looking at the totals come in, and then you find out that Tom Beamish wins, and he's going to be the new council member. How is that feeling to know that you are the council member elect?
Well, I'm pretty competitive, so it was really nice to have won, but also I was going, oh no, now what do I do? You know, we had a election night party at Larry and Martha Fairfield's home. They're good friends. Martha's still a real good friend of ours. And so we had a lot of people over, and it's exciting, and it's just a lot of satisfaction in having won and having had a successful candidate. But with that, I knew there was still a lot to know. Having been on the Planning Commission for 5 years, the transition was fairly easy because I knew people at city staff, and I knew a lot of the issues going on. And what was really, I thought, interesting for me is my very first meeting is when the LA County fire contract came up in November or December of 2004. Maybe it was in the January meeting.
Okay.
But it was the first meeting, and here we had this huge contract to decide. So I read that contract. As
And
you know,
ironically,
Jim, I overanalyze things.
Ironically, we have a fire truck going by while you're talking about.
We did, yeah.
Right now.
So that was a big contract, and I, you know, Steve, I had questions about it. I talked to Steve about it, and got through that contract. And what's interesting about politics is I ran, and my campaign manager did not want to have LA County. They wanted to retain the old La Habra Fire Department. And so I was elected, and a lot of the people that supported me did not want to go with LA County. And however, in reading the contract and trying to look ahead of what was best for La Habra, my decision was the best for La Habra would be to go with LA County, which did not make some of my supporters happy, but 4 years later they still supported me. So it's worked out real well with LA
It's worked
County.
out very well. So you mentioned Steve Anderson quite a bit. What is Steve Anderson meant to you, and what do you think he's meant to this community over the years?
He's meant a great deal. He was my mentor.
Yeah.
He taught me a lot how to go about doing politics. One of the things I was really proud of is he was chairman of the Orange County Sanitation District when he was there, and I was his alternate, and then I became a member of the Sand District for about 8 years and wound up being a chairman. And so there's a brass plaque down there when he was chairman that they started the groundwater replenishment system, which recycles millions of gallons of water a day, which is important today. Well, the first expansion of that system, I was chairman, so I'm not big on having my name on plaques, but it's kind of neat because I have my name on that plaque as chairman, and it's kind of side by side with Steve. And I had shown that to Josie, and you know, it was really, really nice. But yeah, Steve was a great mentor. We did a lot together, you know. I became kind of part of his family in a sense. And it was horrible the day that I got the call that he had died.
You were pallbearer at his funeral.
I was, and that's where people really, I think, recognize what he had done for La Habra. There was probably 2,500, 3,000 people there. And the things that he would do for Little League and for people around the community, he didn't brag about things. You know, he was pretty quiet about what he did, and he was very accomplished in the water business. He had been just elected to the Metropolitan Water District, you know, a few months earlier, which had been one of his goals. He wasn't going to run for city council again, so he was in his last term. And so people recognized, unfortunately, in the funeral, in a sense, and not before, of all he did. I mean, people that were involved in the community knew what Steve Anderson did and his family for the city, which was a lot. And I remember the funeral, and yes, I was a pallbearer, but they did that coffin. It was a candy red coffin, and it had the Rolling Stones logo on there, and had some Rolling Stones music carrying that thing in. So it was quite the funeral.
How did your life change once you joined the city council?
It just was, I was busier, you know, but I had been on the planning commission for 5 years, and so I operated like I did on the planning commission. I was always open to talk to people, you know, more meetings, I suppose, but it was a good fit for me, and so my life didn't really change a whole lot.
What surprised you most once you got on the council?
I suppose no one understood my humor. My wife would always say, "You're not funny, Tom, just quit trying to make jokes," because I have a dry sense of humor. So sometimes people don't know when I'm joking. But once I got on council, I understood I represented the people of La Habra, and I always try, and still to this day, try to make non-political decisions, if you will. I like to try to base it on policy. So there are some things that it may not be politically for me the best thing to do, and I vote policy-wise what I think is the best policy for the city of La Habra.
So early on those city council days, it was you, Steve Simonian, Steve Anderson, myself, and Rose. Is that
Yes.
correct?
Yes.
So how did you and your colleagues get along, and how were those early years with that mix on the council?
Well, I would say it was actually pretty good. I think over the years I've been proud to say that I think all of us got along. We didn't take things real personally when we not vote. Back in that day there were some issues, but a lot of the votes were 5-0 votes, 4-1 votes, and there were some 3-2 votes. So I would say on the big issues, which was really nice, is everybody pretty much had their heart for what's best for La Habra.
Yeah.
And that's what made it nice being on the city council. There are some real dysfunctional councils around the county, as you know, and different people we deal with, that it just would not be a good environment to be in.
So what would you say was the most challenging part back then?
Back in the early days, just understanding how to form relationships for votes, because you need to have 3 votes to get anything accomplished. And I've always been frustrated because it takes so long to get anything accomplished in city government. And of course, today our biggest concern for me is the state of California preempting local control on several issues. That it takes that authority out of our hands.
So looking back at those early days, do you think there's anything that you would do differently?
I don't think so. I look back at the votes that I took back then, and that would be the same. We had some issues that we worked through. I think overall we tried to come to a consensus that you don't have today in other politics where people are on one side or the other and they don't want to work together with the others. I mean, we have some times that things come up where we may disagree on issues, but we try to collaboratively work together towards the best.
So God, since you've been on the council, there's been a lot that the council's worked on together as a team.
That has.
What are some of those projects that you remember stand out for you?
Well, La Bonita Park was one of the really good developments that I liked. Of course, LA County Fire Department, that's had ramifications all these years later.
Yeah.
As you know, they have the resources and provide the city great service, and it's at a reasonable cost, if you will, compared to where we would have been if we hadn't have gone with LA County Fire Department. Back in the, let's see here, 2004, so 2007, 8 is when we were struggling with some financial issues. You know, we had some real issues with the bargaining groups that we had to work through. You know, we got to a point with the recession that unfortunately we had to lay a couple people off, 4 people I think it was, and during those times you kind of grow closer as a council, but yet it's stressful in making those kinds of decisions, having to manage the budget.
Tom, you've been on city council quite a bit. Take me back to all those accomplishments you were able to participate on the city council.
Where to begin? So, as I mentioned, 2004, the biggest deal was the LA County Fire contract.
Yeah.
And then the skate park issue, we had gotten the skate park in before I was on council, I think. Or maybe I was on council when it finally got put in. And then, of course, La Bonita Park. And what was nice about La Bonita Park, having been in the old day when I was on the AOSO soccer board, we shared Imperial with girls softball. We made it okay, and one of the reasons I got on the board was to try to smooth some feelings over, because there was kind of infighting between softball and soccer in those days, and Steve Anderson was a big supporter of La Bonita Park development. And so we started those hearings when I was on the Community Services
Right.
Commission. And ultimately, by the time I was on council, we dedicated La Bonita Park. So that's really, really a great decision the council made, and that we got that in. And so then the girls softball moved to La Bonita Park, and that freed up Imperial for the scheduling, because as I mentioned, AYSO soccer has a lot of kids in the program. And I kind of laughed because I just thought that I was out of it for 20 years, and my daughter had my grandkids, and so the last 2 years I wound up coaching Kylie in soccer again, and then both Cassidy and Kylie last year in the season. And so it brought back memories, because I even reffed a couple little games and went down there and watched how the new board was doing and how their process had changed a lot. But it was really fun. And Kylie, I lucked out. It's a non-competitive team, which was probably good, but somehow I got all the good girls, and we had an undefeated season, and the kids had a lot of fun. So I kind of got off track there, but it was just kind of fun.
So let's highlight. What have been some of your favorite projects since being on the council you think you've worked
La Bonita Park
Yeah.
was really good. And back then my goal was to get Vista Grande Park developed. So now 14 years later, after being on the council, we're finally awarded a contract for the design element of the park. So I hope that before I leave office, I can be part of the ribbon cutting ceremony on Vista Grande Park, because that was Steve's dream also, because Little League used to play at Vista Grande till the
old Blake
field
Field,
started settling. So that would be good. Obviously, the new City Hall project has been a great project financially for the city.
And we're sitting in the brand new council chambers.
Brand new council chambers.
Did you ever imagine when you and I got on the city council that we would have a brand new city hall?
No, I never knew that. And how that came about, which was really kind of fun, is that the property owner that was going to build homes here, when that application was submitted to the city, some of our staff people said, oh, well, let's look at this, and maybe we could do a swap and all that. So it worked out really well, because not only do we have the new city hall, we have a refurbished police station and community services and building with 2 new room additions. So never thought of that. Another project that was really good is the apartment complex over in Beach, because for those of you that remember, years ago that used to be a Dodge dealership, I think.
Habra Dodge.
Back when I was living in La Mirada.
951 South Beach Boulevard, Habra Dodge.
Yep. And so that went away eventually. The Korean church came in and had a campus there for several years.
Prior to that, Friendly Hills Medical Center was there.
Yep, that was there. And then they vacated and the property became abandoned, and then the Sunset Hotel was a hotel that everybody would like to see go away. A lot of problems there. And so that project with the apartment complex, I think, is really, it was a $100 million project, refurbished that whole area, and I think one of Jim's goals was to get Trader Joe's in here, and that was a long process to get them to come in. And I think part of that is because of the development we've seen over the years with the apartment complex. Black Bear Diner came in, Raising Cane's, so they are seeing this residential development come in. And so I think that over the years we had the general plan update, which I'm proud of that. That was a 3-year process that we participated in, and did some rezoning, which allowed a lot of this development. Of course, the big issue now is all the traffic that we have going through the city. For those of you who don't know, Hacienda Road is closed down, and so we have more traffic on Whittier Boulevard, but a lot of the traffic generated is cut-through traffic from Brea and Whittier, and people just cutting through town. But all this development has really done the city well. We have a second Walmart, which is sort of unheard of in the circles, and they're doing well. We have a national brand hotel coming into town, which is good. What have I left out, Jim?
Oh, a lot going on. We had Target wasn't around. The brand new Target wasn't around when we got on there. We were part of the ribbon cutting there.
Yeah. Oh, and we did the where Corner Bakery is. That shopping center is refurbished.
That's where Target is, yeah.
Yeah, and I'll always remember Steve Simonian wanting a fountain down there, and
and we
you
had
know,
a discussion about the fountain.
Yeah, we had a fountain, and so the developer fountains don't work, and they didn't want to do the fountain, and so Steve says, I want a fountain, and I was thinking, well, I want a fountain too, and so the first drawing came back and had this little fountain, and Steve goes, that's not what I'm talking. That's not that isn't any fountain, and so as a result, we have a really great fountain there, and Corner Bakery is a success in that corner. So that was another development. Oh, the Northgate. It was great to have the Northgate shopping. Old shopping center was there on La Habra Boulevard, and they moved up to up there by Idaho and Hacienda and really refurbished that center. That's a great project.
So how does it make you feel as a council member to be able to take a project and have it come before you at the city council and see it start to finish?
Other than it taking too long, it's great.
Yeah,
It's great. When we moved into La Habra in 1982, and a lot of things over the years weren't taking place because the city didn't have the money.
Yeah.
You need money to have a great police force, a great fire department. You need money to do the sidewalks and the streets and the water infrastructure. And so over the years, we were able to get some of the things accomplished. And that was the other thing as we were on council here the last few years, that we came up with a pavement management program where we were able to repave all the residential streets, and now we're doing the bigger streets. But it's nice to see. It took 6 years to do all the streets. So you see at the beginning and you see at the end, and at the end you just feel really happy and proud that you were able to accomplish those things through the city staff.
What would you say has been the biggest challenge being on the city council?
Just the decision-making process on things, especially when there's an issue that's contentious within the community. You know, I've always tried to do my homework, and as I mentioned earlier, do what's best for the community. So sometimes we make decisions that are contrary to the group sitting out there in the audience, or people pounding us because they don't think we're making the right decision, and it just kind of comes with the territory.
What has been the most gratifying part of being a council member?
Accomplishing those things that we start out. As I mentioned, it's going to be a really good feeling to get Vista Grande built and up and running. I mean, it's just, La Bonita was another thing, you know, because I came from the youth sports, you know, youth background, and seeing those kids with their smiles on their faces is great. Seeing the girls being able to play a La Bonita, or the soccer kids. And that's where I was on the soccer board in the 90s, and then going back to those same fields with my grandkids, and seeing that's still a viable organization and gives a lot. Same thing with the Children's Museum. It was much smaller back in that day, but over the years we've accomplished a lot through the council expansions and the Friends of the Library. It's nice seeing my grandkids having the same happiness that my children did at their age back in the 80s.
So going back from the early years when you first came to La Habra, driving back around today in the La Habra of today, what are your thoughts?
We're bigger and better.
Yeah.
I drive the same streets as everybody else, and I get irritated sometimes because the traffic slows me down. But I like the 7.5 square mile city that we have. People that do things in town, we all know each other. We're all trying to make La Habra a better place to live, a caring community. So when I drive around town, I see the things the council, it's a team effort, have achieved over the years. And the projects I mentioned earlier, you know, driving down Whittier Boulevard and seeing the Northgate complex there now is great. So you see these things. The new city hall now, I drive by there, and it gives you a sense of pride that you're part of that decision making. We are congested. We're not semi-rural anymore. We're pretty urban. Yeah. And now it's just the issues ahead of us is how much development, where do you want to do development, you know, how do you balance that with traffic and
Right.
congestion, with the need for revenue growth. The reason we develop is to generate money so we can provide the services to the community. So I think we're in a good place.
You've worn many hats in the city, and one of those where you got to be mayor a few times.
Twice.
Yeah. So, what were your thoughts when you became mayor?
Well, as I said, I never thought I would run for office, and I was really amazed to be having that position. And I enjoyed it. It's nice that we rotate the mayorship because it really gives you a different perspective, leading the council meetings and being really the face of the council at functions. And so it's an honor.
Yeah.
You know, it's something that I'll always remember.
And
you know,
you were very proactive, pro-business, and started the ad hoc committee when you were mayor.
I did.
And you want to share a little bit about that, kind of that you
Yeah.
started?
When of course, I was mayor pro tem, realizing I would more than likely be mayor. After that, I started thinking about what theme I wanted to do, and I Jim, you wanted Trader Joe's and different, you know, quality businesses, and that's what I always liked about Steve Simoni, and he wanted quality businesses coming to town, which I agreed with. And so as mayor, I started thinking, what can we do to enhance La Habra so the businesses would want to come to La Habra and stay? And so I was talking to one of the council members from Fullerton, and they had talked about a committee that they had for business development. And so I got thinking about it, and so in my research I said, well, why don't we partner with the chamber and have an ad hoc business committee or community development committee? And so that was my first meeting as the new mayor. I brought this up. This is the goal. I'd like staff and to work with the chamber, and I would be involved, and we would start this committee. And so once we started, I said, now look, what I would like to see is visit businesses in town. You know, take a handful of businesses, say 6 businesses a day, and we would go out and meet and greet kind of thing with a business and see, what do you like about La Habra doing business? What don't you like? Do you have concerns with the staff process, you know, of getting permits, licenses, those kinds of things? What can we do to help you be more successful? And so my year as mayor, I went out with the chamber president and several staff people, and we would interview businesses, and I believe they still do that today, and it was pretty successful, I thought.
So, what legacy do you think you leave behind on the city council?
I only would like to leave a legacy of one that I was open, transparent, and fair in what decisions that I made, and hopefully I just leave it in a better place than when I came in 2004.
What does La Habra mean to you?
Home. It's where I raised my family.
How would Tom Beamish like to be remembered?
I would like to be remembered that I made decisions on what was best for La Habra. And that's it. You know, that's what I've always, my goal has always been to do what's right by the community, because I have raised my children here. We've been involved from the Lions Club to the civic community, many different various organizations. I was on the Help for Brain Injured Children Executive Board for a few years, real involved in Lions, like I mentioned. I'm playing the Boys and Girls Club tournament on Monday, so my wife and I have been real involved in the community, and I'd like to see the community have great success once I'm out of office and off on my further adventures.
What advice would you give to the next generation of council members that come after us?
Do what's right for La Habra. Not make decisions based on politics or what's best for your political life. You know, I just abhor politics today at the federal and state level. I think they're not getting anything done because each side, they don't want to compromise, they don't want to negotiate in good faith. And I think at the local level we need that to stay here in La Habra because I think it's made us successful. I don't like, as I mentioned earlier, how the state is getting into our business with regards to housing and a few other factors that you take away local control. It's not good because local control is what affects people in the community more than anywhere else. And we may have to make decisions based on what the state has done, and it doesn't allow us any flexibility.
Fill in the blank. Tom Beamish is?
Old. Tom Beamish is fair. Try to be fair in my decisions.
Is there anything else you want to add, Tom?
I try to listen to people. I'm always open. If anybody wants to talk to a council person, that would be great. I've had some real good years in the city, and it'll be emotional when I leave.
Right now, you're right.
I'm even getting emotional now.
Yeah. Thank you, Tom.
Sure. My pleasure.